The crack of gunfire shattered the serene calm of Sweetwater Creek, sending a flock of startled birds into the azure Montana sky, as June Zimmerman clutched her children close to her chest, their small bodies trembling against her own. It was 1876, a particularly bloody year in the untamed West, and June had come to believe that God had all but forgotten this forsaken stretch of territory where the law was as scarce as rainfall in August. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she crouched behind the overturned wagon, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it might give her position away to the ruthless bandits who had ambushed them on their journey home from town. "Mama, I'm scared," whispered 7-year-old Emma, her blue eyes wide with terror, while 5-year-old Thomas buried his face in his mother's worn calico dress. June stroked Emma's hair, trying to keep her voice steady. "Hush now, darlings. Everything's going to be all right." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. Since losing her husband to typhoid fever last winter, she had learned that promises were luxuries she could no longer afford. Another volley of bullets splintered the wooden wagon wheel mere inches from where they huddled. June knew they couldn't stay there much longer. The bandits were moving closer, their harsh laughter carrying on the wind. "When I count to 3, she whispered, "we're going to run for those rocks." She gestured toward a rocky outcropping about 20 yards away. "Stay low and don't look back." The children nodded, their faces pale with fear. 1, 2. Before she could reach 3, a gruff voice called out from somewhere behind them. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, madam." June froze, instinctively pulling her children tighter against her. The voice didn't belong to one of the bandits. It had a different quality to it, steady, commanding, but not threatening. "Stay down," the voice continued. "I'm going to draw their fire." June didn't have time to respond before 3 rapid shots rang out from behind her, followed by a pained cry from one of the bandits. She risked a glance over her shoulder and saw him, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a weathered face partially hidden beneath the wide brim of a dusty black hat. He moved with surprising grace for his size, ducking behind a boulder as bullets ricocheted around him. 2 more shots from his revolver found their marks, and suddenly the air was filled with the sound of retreating hoofbeats as the remaining bandits fled. In the silence that followed, June kept her body positioned protectively over her children, uncertain whether this stranger was truly their savior or simply a different kind of danger. The man approached slowly, his gun now holstered, hands slightly raised to show he meant no harm. "Name's Zeke Ardell," he said, his voice gentler now. "Those men won't be bothering you again today, but we should move on. They might come back with reinforcements." June eyed him warily. His clothes were trail-worn but clean faded denim pants, a simple cotton shirt, and a leather vest. The badge pinned to his chest caught the sunlight, a U.S. Marshal's star. "Thank you, Marshal," she said cautiously, still not moving from her protective stance. "I'm June Zimmerman. These are my children, Emma and Thomas." Something in Zeke's expression softened as he looked at the children. "Pleasure to meet you all, though I wish it were under better circumstances." His eyes scanned their surroundings. "Your wagon looks salvageable. Where are you headed?" "Home. We have a small homestead about 5 miles north of here," Zeke nodded. "I'll escort you." "Those men are part of the Blackwater gang. They've been terrorizing this territory for months." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "It's not safe for a woman and children to be traveling alone these days." June felt her pride flare. "We've managed just fine, Marshal." A hint of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I don't doubt that, Mrs. Zimmerman, but even the bravest folks can use a helping hand sometimes." As they righted the wagon and gathered the scattered supplies, June found herself studying the Marshal when he wasn't looking. There was something in his eyes, a shadow of grief or loss that resonated with her own. Despite his imposing physical presence, he handled her children with gentle care, lifting Thomas onto the wagon seat with a tenderness that made her chest tighten inexplicably. The journey back to the homestead passed without further incident, though Zeke remained vigilant, his hand never straying far from his holster. When they crested the final hill and the small cabin came into view, June felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. Home had never looked so welcoming. "It's not much," she said, suddenly self-conscious of their modest dwelling with its patched roof and the small garden she'd struggled to maintain. "Looks like heaven to me," Zeke replied with unexpected sincerity. "I've spent too many nights under the stars to take a proper roof for granted." June invited him to stay for supper, the least she could offer for saving their lives. As she prepared a simple meal of rabbit stew and cornbread, she watched him sit on the porch with her children, whittling small wooden animals that delighted them. Thomas, usually shy around strangers, had taken to Zeke immediately, perhaps instinctively sensing the void of a father figure in his young life. Over the meal, June learned that Zeke had been tracking the Blackwater gang for weeks, following a trail of robberies and violence across 3 territories. He spoke little of himself, though she gathered he'd been a marshal for nearly 8 years, and before that, had fought in the war. "What brought you to Montana Territory?" she asked as she poured him a second cup of coffee. A shadow crossed his face. "I was stationed in Wyoming for a time. Things changed. Montana seemed like a good place for a fresh start." June recognized the deliberate vagueness in his answer, the mark of someone carrying wounds too deep to expose to a stranger. She understood that all too well. "Well, we're certainly grateful you happened by when you did," she said, changing the subject. As twilight descended, Zeke insisted on sleeping in the small barn rather than continuing on to town. "I'd rest easier knowing you're safe through the night," he explained, and June found she didn't have the heart or perhaps the desire to argue. The following morning, June woke to the aroma of coffee and the sound of chopping wood. She peered out the window to see Zeke splitting logs with powerful, methodical swings of the axe. He'd already amassed a considerable pile, more than enough to see her through several weeks. "Your mama's watching you," Emma told Thomas with a giggle, and June realized she'd been staring. She quickly moved away from the window, her cheeks warm with embarrassment. When she stepped outside with a tin cup of coffee for him, Zeke paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "Hope I didn't wake you," he said, accepting the cup gratefully. "Figured I'd make myself useful before I head out." "You've done more than enough, Marshal," June replied, touched by his consideration. "I'm not sure how to thank you properly." "Zeke," he corrected gently. "And no thanks necessary, Mrs. Zimmerman." "June," she offered in return, suddenly aware of how long it had been since she'd introduced herself to a man by her first name. The realization brought with it a flutter of something she'd thought long buried possibility. After breakfast, Zeke prepared to depart, checking his horse's saddle and packing his few belongings. The children watched him with undisguised disappointment. "You have to go?" Thomas asked, his lower lip trembling slightly. Zeke knelt down to the boy's level. "Afraid so, partner. Got some bad men to catch." He handed Thomas the small wooden horse he'd carved the night before. "You take care of your mama and sister while I'm gone, all right?" The boy nodded solemnly, clutching the wooden figure to his chest. As Zeke mounted his horse, he tipped his hat to June. "I'll be passing back this way in a week or so, if that's all right with you, just to check in." June found herself nodding before she could question the warmth that spread through her at his words. "We'd like that." She and the children stood in the yard, watching until his figure disappeared over the ridge. Only then did June realize she'd been holding her breath, as if some part of her feared that once he rode out of sight, he'd prove to be nothing more than a dream conjured from her loneliness. The week that followed seemed to stretch endlessly. June threw herself into her chores with renewed vigor, repairing fences, tending the garden, and cleaning the cabin until it shone. She told herself it was simply the satisfaction of tackling tasks that had been neglected. But every evening her eyes drifted to the ridge where Zeke had disappeared. On the 8th day, when she'd nearly convinced herself he wouldn't return, Emma's excited shout drew her from the chicken coop. "Mama, he's coming back!" June shaded her eyes against the afternoon sun, her heart skipping as she recognized the familiar silhouette approaching on horseback. She smoothed her hair and straightened her apron, then immediately felt foolish for doing so. Zeke's face bore fresh bruises, and he moved with a slight stiffness that suggested he'd been in a fight, but his smile when he saw them waiting was genuine. "You're hurt," June said as he dismounted, unable to keep the concern from her voice. "Nothing serious," he assured her, though he winced slightly as Thomas barreled into him for a hug. "Had a run-in with 2 of the gang members near Silver Creek. They're in the Helena jail now." Over supper, Zeke shared sanitized versions of his pursuit, careful to omit the more violent details in front of the children. June sensed there was much he wasn't saying, but she appreciated his discretion. When the children were finally tucked into bed, they sat on the porch, the night air cool and fragrant with pine. "How many more are there?" she asked quietly. "In this gang you're chasing?" Zeke was silent for a moment, staring out into the darkness. "3 that I know of, including their leader, Jackson Cole. He's the worst of them, cruel for the pleasure of it." He glanced at her, his expression grave. "I should warn you, June. Men like Cole, they don't forget a face. If he finds out you witnessed his men being captured, he might." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Fear crept up June's spine, but she lifted her chin. "We can't live in fear forever, Zeke. This is our home." "I know," he said, his voice soft. "And I promise you I won't rest until they are all behind bars." After a pause, he added, "Or in the ground." The intensity in his eyes made her shiver, though not entirely from fear. "Why is this so personal for you?" she asked, sensing that his pursuit went beyond the call of duty. Zeke looked down at his hands, calloused and strong. "Cole and his men raided a settlement near Cheyenne 2 years ago. A family I knew, good people." His voice grew rough. "The wife and daughter didn't survive." June's heart ached for him. "I'm so sorry." "I was supposed to be there," he continued, the words coming as if they'd been trapped inside him for too long. "I'd promised to escort them to their new homestead, but I was delayed on another case by the time I arrived." He trailed off, his jaw clenching. Instinctively, June placed her hand over his. "It wasn't your fault." His fingers curled around hers, warm and surprisingly gentle. "Maybe not, but I made a vow that day. No more innocent blood on my watch." They sat in silence for a time, their hands still joined, the connection between them deepening in ways neither was ready to acknowledge. The next morning, before departing, Zeke taught June how to use the rifle he'd noticed mounted above her door, an old Spencer that had belonged to her husband. "You hold it firm against your shoulder," he instructed, standing close behind her, his hands guiding hers. "That's it. Take a breath, then exhale halfway before you squeeze the trigger." June was acutely aware of his proximity, the solid warmth of his chest near her back, his breath stirring the loose tendrils of hair at her temple. When she fired and hit the makeshift target he'd set up, his proud smile made her feel strangely accomplished. "You're a natural," he said. "Though I hope you never have to use it." This time when he left, he promised to return within 2 weeks. "I've got a lead on Cole's whereabouts," he explained. If I can catch him, this could all be over soon. June watched him go with a mix of hope and trepidation, wondering if the end of his mission would also mean the end of his visits. The days stretched into a week, then 10 days. June kept busy, but at night, lying alone in her bed, she found herself thinking of Zeke, his quiet strength, the gentleness beneath his rugged exterior, the way his rare smile transformed his face. She chided herself for such thoughts. A U.S. Marshal had no place for settling down, especially not with a widow burdened with 2 young children and a struggling homestead. On the 12th day, a stranger rode up to the cabin while June was hanging laundry. Instinctively, she positioned herself between the approaching rider and her children who were playing nearby. "Mrs. Zimmerman," the man called, stopping a respectful distance away. "Yes." She replied cautiously, her hand drifting toward the pocket where she kept a small derringer, another of Zeke's precautions. "Name's Henry Dawson, madam. I work with Marshal Ardell." He tipped his hat politely. "He asked me to check on you and deliver a message. He's been delayed in Bannack, but expects to return this way in about a week." Relief flooded through June, both for the news and for Zeke's thoughtfulness in sending word. "Thank you, Mr. Dawson. Would you care for some refreshment before you continue on?" The young deputy accepted gratefully, and over lemonade, shared what news he could of Zeke's progress. "He's closing in on Cole," Dawson said, his admiration for Zeke evident. "Never seen a marshal so determined." After Dawson departed, June found herself both reassured and unsettled. The prospect of Zeke confronting Cole filled her with dread, yet she understood the necessity of it not just for justice, but for Zeke's own peace. The week passed slowly. June continued her daily routines, but with a heightened vigilance, checking the horizon more frequently and keeping the Spencer loaded and within reach. The children sensed her tension and became more subdued, especially Thomas, who had taken to carrying his wooden horse everywhere. When 9 days had passed with no sign of Zeke, June began to fear the worst. That night, after the children were asleep, she sat alone on the porch, staring at the stars and fighting back tears. The thought that Zeke might have met his end at Cole's hands was almost unbearable, though she could scarcely admit to herself why it affected her so deeply. A sound in the darkness startled her, the soft nickering of a horse. June grabbed the rifle and stood, her heart racing. "Who's there?" she called, her voice steadier than she felt. "It's me, June." Zeke's voice brought such a wave of relief that her knees nearly buckled. She lowered the rifle as he emerged from the shadows, leading his horse slowly. Even in the moonlight, she could see he was injured, his gait uneven, his right arm held stiffly at his side. "You're hurt," she said, rushing to help him. "Nothing that won't heal," he replied, though his face was drawn with pain. Inside, by lamplight, the extent of his injuries became clear. A bullet had grazed his side, and his right shoulder bore a deep gash that had been hastily bandaged. "Cole?" she asked as she carefully removed his bloodied shirt. Zeke's expression hardened. "Got away. We had a shootout in an abandoned mine near Bannack. I got 2 more of his men, but Cole, he's slippery as a snake." June cleaned and redressed his wounds with gentle hands, trying not to notice the map of old scars across his torso, each one a testament to the dangers he'd faced. When she finished, their eyes met, and something electric passed between them, a recognition of feelings neither had intended to develop. Zeke broke the contact first, clearing his throat. "I shouldn't have come here," he said quietly. "If Cole is tracking me—" "Stop," June interrupted, her voice firm. "You're hurt and exhausted. This is exactly where you should be." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, laden with meaning neither was ready to explore fully. In the days that followed, Zeke's presence transformed the homestead. Despite his injuries, he insisted on helping with chores, teaching Thomas to fish in the creek, and entertaining Emma with stories of his more light-hearted adventures. June watched the easy rapport he developed with her children, the way they blossomed under his attention, and felt both joy and fear. Joy for the happiness he brought them, fear for the inevitable pain when he left again. As his wounds healed, June sensed Zeke growing restless, though he never spoke of leaving. One evening, as they sat on the porch after the children were asleep, she finally broached the subject. "You'll be going after him again soon, won't you?" Zeke's gaze remained fixed on the distant mountains, purple in the twilight. "I have to, June. As long as Cole is free, people aren't safe." He hesitated, then added quietly, "You and the children aren't safe." June nodded, understanding but not liking it. "And after, when he's caught or gone?" Now Zeke turned to look at her, his eyes searching her face. "I've been thinking about that," he admitted. "For the first time in years, I've been thinking about after." The implications of his words made her heart race. "What do you see?" "In this after, peace," he said simply. "A home, family." His hand moved to cover hers, a gentle but deliberate gesture. "Things I never thought I'd want again, not until I met you and the children." June's breath caught. "Zeke." The sound of approaching horses cut her off. Both of them were on their feet instantly, alert to danger. "Get inside," Zeke ordered, his hand already on his holster. "Wake the children and go to the root cellar. Don't come out until I call for you." June wanted to protest, to stand beside him, but the thought of Emma and Thomas kept her from arguing. She hurried inside, rousing the sleepy children and explaining in hushed, urgent tones that they needed to hide. "Is it the bad men?" Thomas asked fearfully as she led them to the trapdoor in the kitchen floor. "SHH, sweetheart. Marshal Zeke will protect us," she assured him, though her own heart was pounding with fear. From the root cellar, they could hear muffled voices, then the unmistakable sound of gunfire. Emma whimpered, and June held her children close, whispering prayers and reassurances while her mind conjured terrifying images of what might be happening above. What felt like hours later, though it was likely only minutes, silence fell. June held her breath, straining to hear any sound that might indicate who had prevailed. Then came footsteps, heavy across the wooden floor, and a voice called out, not Zeke's. "Mrs. Zimmerman, I know you're in here somewhere. Come out now, and maybe I'll let those children of yours live." Cold terror washed over June. She pressed a finger to her lips, signaling the children to remain absolutely silent. The footsteps moved around the cabin, accompanied by the sound of furniture being overturned and items being smashed. "Your Marshal friend isn't going to help you," the voice continued, closer now. "He's a bit occupied at the moment." June's mind raced. Was Zeke dead? Wounded? She couldn't bear the thought of either possibility, but more pressing was the immediate danger to her children. The trapdoor was well hidden under a rug and a small table, but if the intruder was thorough enough. A creak directly above them confirmed her fears. The table was being moved. "Found you," the voice said with malicious satisfaction. Light spilled into the root cellar as the trapdoor was wrenched open. Looking up, June saw a man with a scarred face and cold eyes. "Jackson Cole," she presumed, pointing a revolver down at them. "Come on up, Mrs. Zimmerman. Bring the little ones too." June pushed the children behind her as they climbed out, her body positioned to shield them. Cole watched with amused contempt. "Touching," he sneered. "But it won't save them, or you." "What do you want?" June demanded, desperate to keep his attention on her rather than the children. Cole's smile was chilling. "Justice, of a sort. Your friend Ardell has been making my life difficult. It seems only fair I return the favor by taking something he cares about." Outside, June could see two more men standing guard, but no sign of Zeke. her heart constricted with fear for him. "Please," she said, her voice steady despite her terror. "Let the children go. They're innocent in all this." Cole laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "Nobody's innocent in this world, madam, least of all the brats of a woman who harbors a killer like Ardell." Emma began to cry softly, and Thomas stood rigid with fear, his small hands clutching June's skirt. "Now," Cole continued, gesturing with his gun toward the door, "we're all going to take a little ride. Ardell will come looking for you, and when he does—" He left the implication hanging in the air. As they stepped outside into the moonlit yard, June frantically searched for any sign of Zeke or a weapon she might use. One of Cole's men roughly grabbed her arm while the other moved toward the children. In that moment, something inside June snapped. With a strength born of desperate maternal instinct, she wrenched free and lunged back toward Emma and Thomas, gathering them against her and turning her back to shield them from whatever was to come. "How sweet," Cole mocked, raising his gun. "Say goodbye to your mama, kids." "Not while I'm standing." The familiar voice came from the shadows near the barn, and June's heart leapt with hope and fear. Zeke stepped into the light, his revolver aimed steadily at Cole despite the blood staining his shirt. Cole's surprise quickly gave way to a calculating smile. "Marshal Ardell, I was beginning to think my men had actually managed to kill you." "They tried," Zeke replied, his voice cold and hard. "They failed." June realized with a sick feeling that the two guards who had been there moments ago were nowhere to be seen. Zeke had already dealt with them. "Let them go, Cole," Zeke continued, moving slowly to position himself between the outlaw and June and her children. "This is between you and me, always has been." Cole's eyes narrowed. "You're in no position to make demands, Marshal. One bullet in you and they're still mine." "You'll never get that shot off," Zeke promised, his aim unwavering. "And even if you did, you'd be dead before you hit the ground." The standoff stretched, tension crackling in the air. June held her breath, her arms tight around her trembling children. "Run to the barn when I tell you," Zeke said without taking his eyes off Cole. "Go now." June didn't hesitate. Pushing the children ahead of her, she ran for the barn as two shots rang out almost simultaneously. She didn't look back, focused only on getting Emma and Thomas to safety. Inside the barn, she hurried them up to the hayloft, then peered cautiously out a small window. What she saw made her blood freeze. Zeke and Cole wrestling on the ground, both men fighting for control of a knife that glinted in the moonlight. Without thinking, June descended from the loft and grabbed a pitchfork leaning against the wall. "Stay here," she ordered the children, then rushed back outside. Cole had gained the upper hand, pinning Zeke beneath him, the knife inching closer to Zeke's throat despite his resistance. June approached silently from behind, raised the pitchfork, and brought it down with all her strength. The tines pierced Cole's back, and he screamed in agony, the knife falling from his grasp. Zeke seized the opportunity, shoving the wounded outlaw aside and reclaiming his dropped revolver. Cole, despite his injury, lunged for his own fallen weapon. Zeke's shot rang out and Cole collapsed, motionless. In the ringing silence that followed, June stood frozen, the bloody pitchfork still in her hands. Zeke approached her slowly, gently taking the implement and setting it aside. "June," he said softly, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders. "June, look at me. It's over. He's gone." She raised her eyes to his, seeing in them not judgment for what she'd done, but profound gratitude and something deeper, something that made her breath catch. "The children," she managed to say, "are safe because of you," Zeke finished. "You saved my life, June." Before she could respond, Emma and Thomas burst from the barn, running toward them with tear-streaked faces. June knelt to embrace them, checking frantically for any injuries. "Mama, we were so scared," Emma sobbed. "I know, sweetheart," June soothed, kissing their foreheads, "but we're safe now. Marshal Zeke protected us." Thomas looked up at Zeke with wide eyes. "Are the bad men gone forever?" Zeke knelt beside them, his expression gentle but honest. "Yes, partner. They can't hurt anyone anymore." Later, after the children were settled back in bed with reassurances and extra hugs, June and Zeke sat at her kitchen table, both exhausted but unable to rest. The local sheriff and his deputies had come and gone, taking Cole's body and confirming that his entire gang had finally been eliminated. "What happens now?" June asked quietly, her hands cradling a cup of tea she hadn't touched. Zeke looked at her, really looked at her, as if seeing past all the barriers they'd both maintained. "Now I keep a promise I made to myself, if you'll let me." "What promise?" He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "To protect what matters most. To build something good after years of just surviving." His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "I've been chasing ghosts for so long, June. Tonight I realized I could have lost the future trying to avenge the past." June's heart pounded. "What are you saying, Zeke?" "I'm saying I love you," he answered simply. "You and those children. I'm saying I want to stay if you'll have me." Tears welled in June's eyes. "The children would like that," she whispered, her voice catching. "And so would I." Zeke's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He stood, drawing her to her feet and into his arms. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, but filled with promise, the beginning of something neither had dared to hope for again. In the weeks that followed, Zeke resigned his position as marshal, though he occasionally assisted the local sheriff when needed. He built an addition to the cabin, giving the growing family more space, and with his help, the homestead began to flourish in ways June had struggled to achieve on her own. By autumn, they were married in a simple ceremony beside Sweetwater Creek, with Emma proudly scattering wildflower petals and Thomas solemnly carrying the rings. Deputy Dawson stood as witness, along with a few neighbors who had become friends. That evening, as they stood on the porch of their home, watching the children chase fireflies in the yard, Zeke wrapped his arms around June from behind, his chin resting atop her head. "Happy?" he asked softly. June leaned back against his solid warmth, a contentment she'd once thought lost forever filling her heart. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. "Good," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Because this is just the beginning, June Ardell." And as the twilight deepened into night, June knew he was right. The dangers they had faced had forged something unbreakable between them, a love strong enough to heal past wounds and brave enough to embrace whatever the future might bring. 1 year later, June stood on that same porch, cradling their newborn son while Emma and Thomas crowded around, eager for another glimpse of their baby brother's face. "He looks like Papa," Emma declared with authority. Thomas nodded in serious agreement. "But he's got Mama's nose." June smiled down at the infant's peaceful face. "What do you think, Zeke? Does Joseph favor his father?" Zeke joined them, his arm sliding around June's waist as he gazed down at their son. The pride and love in his expression made her heart swell. "He's perfect," Zeke said simply. "Just like his mama." As the sun set behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, June reflected on the journey that had brought them here from fear and loss to this abundance of love and family. The West was still wild, still dangerous in many ways, but here in this small corner of Montana territory, they had carved out a sanctuary of their own. "I never thought I'd find this again," Zeke said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "A home, a family." June leaned into his embrace, their children gathered close around them. "Neither did I," she admitted. But some things are worth waiting for. Zeke's answering smile held all the promise of the years stretching before them, years they would face together, no matter what challenges might come. For in each other, they had found not just love, but courage, strength, and the healing they had both so desperately needed. And as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, June knew with absolute certainty that this family, this love was the greatest adventure of all.